What might have been? It is impossible to even begin to imagine in how many ways history could have been different if the superstition of authority had collapsed long ago. Obviously, the atrocities of Nazi Germany, Stalin's Russia, Mao's China, Pol Pot's Cambodia, and many more would never have happened. Furthermore, while there could still be violent regional, cultural, or religious clashes, large-scale wars simply could not and would not happen without soldiers blindly obeying a perceived authority. If the enormous amount of resources, effort, and ingenuity had been poured into mass destruction, war had been put into something productive, where would we be today? If instead of spending a huge amount of time and effort struggling over who should have the reins of power and what the power should be used for, people had spent all those years being inventive and productive, what might the world look like now? What if every person had been allowed to support what he wanted instead of having government robbing everyone, then having a never-ending argument over how those public funds should be spent? What if instead of arguing over which centralized authoritarian plan should be forcibly imposed on everyone, people lived their own lives and pursued their own dreams? Who can even imagine how far humanity as a whole could have progressed by now? This is not to say that without the belief in authority, personal conflicts would never arise. They would, and they would sometimes end in violence. The difference is, with the belief in government, they always end in violence because coercion is all that government ever does. Whereas people, even people of very different viewpoints and backgrounds, can usually find ways to peacefully coexist, any situation which authority becomes involved is automatically solved by force. With the issue of same-sex marriage, what if, instead of an ongoing argument over what views and choices should be forced upon everyone, every church minister, every employer, and every other individual could decide for himself how to live, what he wants to call marriage, and so on? With the issue of prayer in school, what if instead of government creating a hostile conflict by forcibly confiscating money from all property owners to fund one big homogeneous public school system, each person, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, atheist, was allowed to choose which schools, if any, he wanted to support? This does not mean that people of different views would like each other or end up believing the same thing. It does mean that without believing the same things, they could still peacefully coexist. It doesn't mean without believing the same things, they could peacefully coexist, a situation which government does not allow. What if instead of government agencies deciding what drugs and medical treatments it would legally allow people to try and which practitioners would be licensed to practice, people could make their own choices? In such a scenario, the business of providing customers with unbiased information about various products and services would flourish. Government solutions are always about politicians deciding how to deal with different situations and then forcibly imposing their ideas on everyone else. But it is neither morally legitimate nor effective on a practical basis to have politicians making everyone else's choices for them. And that is true of all sorts of aspects of human society. What would the world look like if, for the past 100 years, instead of arguing over how to forcibly limit people's options, which is what every law does, people had spent their time and effort trying new ideas and coming up with new approaches to problems, each person having been allowed to devote his own time, effort, and money to whatever he personally chose to support? What if instead of a centralized system of forced wealth redistribution, government welfare, people had been left in freedom to decide for themselves the best, most compassionate ways to help the needy? Instead of a system that rewards laziness and dishonesty and breeds dependency, we might have a system that actually helps the poor people. What if, instead of government forcing businesses to do whatever the politicians and bureaucrats declared to be safe, people could come up with new ideas and inventions, set their own priorities, and make their own decisions about how to best protect themselves. What if, instead of having a centralized control machine trying to force people to be fair, people could choose for themselves who to associate with, what deals to make, and so on? Everything government pays for creates a conflict. Every public project form, grants given out by the National Endowment for the Arts, to grants for certain studies or businesses, to schools, to parks, to everything else, public amounts to robbing thousands or millions of people in order to give the money to a few people. Why would anyone expect everyone in an entire country, or even 100 people, to all exactly agree on how their money should be spent? What if, instead of many trillions of dollars in spending power being diverted and hijacked every year to fund the agendas of politicians and their bureaucrats, the wealth had gone into whatever things the people who earned the money actually cared about and wanted to support? What if, for the last several thousand years, each person minded his own business and not tried to use government to force his ideas and priorities on everyone else? What if, instead of a giant centralized monster violently limiting everyone's choices, everyone's options, everyone's creativity and ingenuity, trying to force conformity and sameness while draining the producers of their ideas and their wealth, different people and different groups had been trying new ideas and figuring out the best ways to solve problems and create a better world, guided by their own beliefs and values? Sadly, the idea still terrifies a lot of people who still imagine that a world forcibly controlled by politicians would be more safe and civilized than a world inhabited by free human beings exercising free will and individual judgment. The fact is that those people who put their faith in government to make things work, though they are by far the majority, and though they mean well, are the problem. As a result of their indoctrination into the cult of authority, they continue to believe and push the profoundly insane idea that the only road to peace, justice, and harmonious civilization comes from constant, widespread coercion and forcible government controls, perpetual oppression, and enslavement done in the name of law, and the sacrificing of free will and morality at the altar of domination and blind obedience. As harsh as it may sound, that is the basis of all belief in